The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Planted with Sara Payan podcast. I'm Sara Payan, your host, and today we have a very special guest. I am so extraordinarily excited to have Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Dallas on the show today. Congresswoman, welcome. I can't tell you how excited I am in Congress representing us and saying things that should been said a long time ago. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I look forward to the conversation. I really do appreciate you inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. You first caught my eye. I actually checked out a video of you talking about your colleague, Lauren Boebert.
Okay. And I was like, that's where this was going.
And I said, finally, we have a representative, a strong woman who is saying what's on everybody's minds, and they're afraid to say it. So I just want to thank you for just being so forthright and active and really, really working for the people, because we need this. We need people like you there.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't sign up for this job just to kind of sit on my hands. I think a lot of the frustration that most people are feeling and the anxiety that they're feeling at home is the same frustration and anxiety that I felt that prompted me to run for office in the first place. And I knew that legislation is where the real change could be effectuated, because judges can't do anything unless we allow them to do it via law. And so, I started off in the state house, and ultimately, obviously, I've ascended, and now I'm in the U.S. House. But it is that level of frustration. It is that plain talk. It is that keeping it real that I just felt like was missing within the halls of state houses as well as Congress. And so I'm glad that I can be an example of how to be honest and be real and be very human in these times, and push back on the lies and the empty rhetoric and the political games, and really let people know that there are people that feel the exact same way that you feel, that happen to be in a position of power. And I choose to use my power for good. So if that means that I've got to check Lauren Boebert every once in a while, or check Marjorie every once in a while, then I will absolutely do it. That is definitely my superpower.
I am so glad to hear that. So glad. And I think that you're an inspiration for a lot of people to get more involved, because I think in this day and age, people feel a little powerless. And it's really important that we know as voters that we actually have power to vote in the people that are going to represent us and work for us, and that we can hold our representatives accountable. And you have a rich career prior to being in Congress. You were a public defender before.
Yeah. So as a young lawyer who, when I was in law school, said I would never do criminal defense work, I ended up becoming a public defender. My biggest fear was that I would represent someone, they would think I did a bad job, and they would come and try to shoot me. So I was like, I don't want to do this. But you know what? I think I learned more about myself in those times than I've ever learned at any other juncture in my life. That is really when I sought out, where is the power? Who has the power? How is this power being wielded? As I was consistently representing people that fully anticipated that the system was literally going to swallow them up and spit them out. People that did not believe that this was a system in which they had the same constitutional protections as everyone else, simply because they were poor and couldn't afford to hire their own attorney. And I wanted to make sure that we dissuaded people from that type of belief. But it was true. In the town that I was practicing law in, if a private attorney came in, a lot of times they would get a better offer than we as the public defenders got. And as I saw these disparities, I absolutely called it out. I pushed for my clients because it wasn't fair. And we knew that there was a disproportionate number of Black and brown people that were in need of court-appointed attorneys. And so I always wanted people to feel as if they were getting the same protections, the same representation that they were entitled to. And it got to the point that the private bar was pretty upset because people were like, no, 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 we want the public defender. Like, can we get Jasmine? Because we know that she's going to fight for us. And if that means that we go to trial and I duke it out in trial, I'll do it. And I did it countless times. And so, you know, at that juncture, I definitely saw firsthand how people would be treated. I was able to find out about law enforcement officers that weren't doing right by certain people, the illegalities as it relates to searches and seizures, and just walking up to people and deciding because they possessed a bias that this person must have committed a crime. I remember a case, one of my very first cases, where a guy was walking down the street, and it was a black guy, and he goes, and I asked him, I'm like, you know, it says possession. What was the possession? Because we just get categories. And I was like, what is it that they're saying that you had? And he said methamphetamine. And I kind of looked at him like, you had meth? And he was like, I did not have meth. And he was adamant. He was like, I did not have meth. And so this was a guy that had Epsom salt. He said it was Epsom salt to clean my grill. And I was like, what? And so, you know, I don't have a grill. I don't know nothing about cleaning them, you know. And so I looked and I was like, well, surely they did a fighting and fighting and fighting. And that guy sat in jail for 2 months in East Texas because they refused to do anything to even just do a preliminary test. And ultimately, he was not in possession of methamphetamines, but he was walking down the street as a black guy in East Texas. They picked him up. And for the average American, no matter who you are, if you've got 2 months that you aren't paying your bills, whether it's your car note, your house note, or whatever, you lose everything. And the most that they could tell him was sorry. That was all he got. And that's when all of the rap songs that I used to listen to when I was a little girl, when things really started to have some texture for me, and I started to better understand the experiences that have been talked about for years, but for me, they were nothing more than songs. I had never walked and lived that type of life to know what that was. And so even though I had been a victim of racism in college myself as well, I had never been put into a situation like this where people tried to lock me up simply for existing in my skin and wouldn't listen to me and wouldn't believe me, and really took me from a place where I was already struggling and said, let me go ahead and kick you while you're down. That is when I knew that God had decided that I had to do something more than just earn a law degree and go to law school and then go out and make money. But I really needed to do something worthwhile with the blessings that have been bestowed upon me, especially for other people that look like me.
Yeah. I mean, it must be really eye-opening. It's like you said, you had experienced racism, but you hadn't ever been incarcerated for just being you, and that must have been just. How was that? Was it? I mean, I'm sure it would create anger, and it must be frightening. And I mean, for me, like looking at something like that from my standpoint, like I before I got into cannabis, I worked in civil rights, and part of that was because as an Iranian woman and dealing with discrimination when I was younger, during the revolution and the Iran-Iraq War, and then later with 9/11, and a lot of the violence that was happening and people having their rights taken away, especially like financial rights. That was what was really eye-opening for me, because I have the privilege of being ethnically ambiguous, but my father does not. And this was something that frightened me. But it's still not to the extreme as being a black person or a very brown person in the United States. And I find that it's just so disheartening to see that in this day and age, not only are we dealing with this, but in some cases, I don't know if it's that it's escalating or that it's being highlighted more, the extreme discrimination that we're dealing with in the legal system?
It's absolutely been heightened. We've seen a rise in hate overall in this country for anybody that's not an Anglo male. I mean, that's just what it is. The numbers bear out, not just me hypothesizing. One of the meetings that I had today was with a group that was arguing that we needed to increase funding as relates to special places that experience or are targeted for hate because of religion and things like that. And so, it's a real thing. The numbers bear out that there is more hate in our country every day. It's just continually increasing. And I do believe that the rhetoric is coming from the top. When it's okay for someone who, say, sits in a seat like mine to fearmonger, spread hate, disinformation, and to really say, you know what, your history doesn't matter. We're going to delete it. It's just all around, whether we're talking about the LGBTQIA community, whether we're talking about Islamophobia, whether we're talking about anti-Semitism, whether we're talking about Asian hate. Like, you can go through the list. The numbers show that there's been a rise, and I think that that's one of the reasons that I don't have the benefit to just kind of sit back and sit on my hands. I must be able to raise my voice and raise these issues because, again, in my experience, even as a Black person, I had not gone through what I have seen my clients go through. And so it's important to be able to tell those stories. And so for some people, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that there are people that just don't know because they choose not to try to walk a day in someone else's shoes. Mm-hmm. And then there are those that absolutely know, and this is exactly what they want to see happen. But I do think that as members of Congress, we really need to raise the bar. And it seems as if the bar is continually being lowered by members of Congress. And hopefully we can turn things around sooner rather than later and continue to raise the bar. But to reiterate something that you said earlier, which is that this is a team sport. It's not a matter of just me sitting here, but it takes all of us in a democracy fighting together and recognizing that we won't all agree on everything every day. But there is a path that is going to lead us to progress. And there's another path that continue us down a path of regression. And we have to decide, are we ready to keep going down the road and looking for better, or are we looking for worse? But I can't do it as one person. And so it is important that we recognize that the power lies with the people and that the people are the ones that we serve at the privilege of, period. I don't get here without Texas 30. People all around the country and even all around the world may love me. But if Texas 30 does not feel as if I'm doing right by them as their representative, then I'm out. The power lies with the 766,000 people that I currently serve in Texas 30. And it is always my goal and my aim to make sure that I keep them first in everything that I do, whether it's legislatively or otherwise, because I was sent here specifically by them.
That is so incredibly important and impactful for people to understand, and to understand that their votes matter and that voting rights matter. Because if we lose voting rights for certain groups in our country, we are going to see a government that does not serve the people, and we are going to regress. And I wish that we could have more conversations about the fact that a lot of this hatred and people feeling free to have this hatred now and put it out there, that it doesn't serve them either, because we're looking at a very small swath of people that benefit greatly by the fact that we don't get along.
Yeah.
And when we're looking at, I'm just going back into your career and into Texas, you really, you were really supportive of medicinal cannabis in Texas. And I'm wondering what brought you to being so supportive, and thank you. And was part of it some of your work as a public defender?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually filed more bills than anyone else around marijuana legislation in the Texas House. Number one, because I knew exactly what needed to be fixed, and I had a backup for a backup for a backup for a backup. So, I filed kind of the most liberal of liberal bills down to some things that were going to be a little bit more particular. So, of course, I supported everything medicinal and 20s in the state. And in 2019, they expanded upon that. In 2021, they expanded upon that. And so I was continuing to kind of try to move the needle. Had to do with something that's specific to Texas. As number one, Texas, you're only an adult when it comes to criminal justice purposes at the age of 17, only for criminal justice. They raised the age for you to be able to buy a cigarette to 21 because they said they weren't mature enough. They refused to raise the age from 18 to buy an assault weapon. So 18 is the age, but the only thing that you're an adult for, you can still get in trouble. Your parents can still get in trouble if you don't go to school through truancy at 17. But if it's time to go to jail, you go to jail at 17. So one of the things that I was running into is I was representing so many 17-year-olds that were being caught with marijuana. And the thing is this, if they were caught with flour, then they'd most likely get a misdemeanor. So under 2 ounces was a Class B misdemeanor. Under 4 ounces was a Class A misdemeanor. Usually, if they were caught with flour, I mean, it wasn't going to be outside misdemeanor class. Now, if they decided that they wanted to have Rice Krispie treats, or if they were going to have vapes, or if they were going to have it in any other form, if they combined it with sugar, flour, anything, that weight was counted as well. It was aggregated. And so Rice Krispies, brownies, vapes, they were all felonies. So I had all these kids that were being charged with felonies. There was no misdemeanor for this. And what most people don't understand also about if you are convicted of a felony drug crime, then that usually prevents you from being able to access federal aid for college. And so it was so many layers to this. And Texas has 254 counties and 30 million people. And if I had, say, a kid in Dallas County, I could work with my prosecutors and most likely get something that was not going to ruin their lives before they began. If I was in, say, Texarkana or Bowie County, East Texas, not necessarily the same. And so it was the inconsistency. And while I absolutely believe in prosecutorial discretion, it seemed like if you went somewhere that was a blue county, you probably could be assured that we were going to be smart on children. But if you went maybe to a red county, then there would be a disproportionate number of people of color or children of color that would be prosecuted for the felonies while other children may not ever even go to court. And so that's when I was saying, we've got to do something to change this in every single county in the state. And so even my colleagues on the state house floor, they had no idea. And I was able to get any bill that I laid out as it relates to marijuana, I got them out of committee in a bipartisan way. I was usually able to bring Freedom Caucus in on all my bills. I'm like, listen, it's coming from the earth. This is about freedom. I could get the Freedom Caucus to come on in with me. And so I was getting those bills out of committee. If I went ahead and submitted and I laid them out, I usually was fine. It was whether or not it got to adamantly against reforming marijuana. So it was never going to get anywhere in the Senate. And sometimes it would just be negotiated out. We won't even bring it up because we know it's not going anywhere and that kind of stuff. And it was really unfortunate. But we have just so many children in Texas that are being caught up for doing kid stuff, to be perfectly honest. And the idea that someone may actually have more actual marijuana, but if it's in the form of flour, they're going to get a misdemeanor than the person who's essentially being charged for the sugar and the chocolate and the Rice Krispies. It was just, it was very frustrating. But these are the types of injustices that led me to say, I've got to rewrite the laws and I've got to rewrite them as soon as possible.
Yeah. One thing that I've learned as somebody who works in policy, I was the co-chair of the legalization task force for San Francisco, and now I'm on the state committee where I'm the chair of the medicinal use subcommittee. I go to other states to lecture on policy or education, and one of the things that I've noticed is that policy isn't necessarily based on fact. It's based on state culture, which is very strong. And it's part of, some of that is part of what makes our country beautiful, but it's also based on stigma.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see what's been going on in your state, because a lot of your constituents are very pro cannabis, and you even have the Texas Cannabis Caucus there. So I'm wondering about, with the governor and policy and the will of the people, how that's all going to come together.
Yeah, I mean, listen, truly we can get bipartisan bills out of the House, the Texas House, on marijuana. It happened. In fact, we had a more aggressive medicinal bill when I was there in 21, and that medicinal bill covered so many more ailments. And by the time we got it over to the Senate, they stripped a lot of it. So, I mean, the House was actually able, it's kind of like what we saw with the impeachment. The House was like, you know what, Paxton, he got to go, right? And the Senate is like, oh, maybe not so much, right? That's essentially what happens in Texas all the time. I know that people look at the state and they're thinking, man, it is an awful place when it comes to like legislation. And I can't necessarily disagree, but I can say that if there is a middle ground to be had, it comes out of the House, the Texas House. And unfortunately, things get really bad when they go to the Texas Senate. And marijuana is just one of those places that we really could do some good. And again, incrementally, it continues to move. I don't know when they'll feel good enough to just kind of let it all go. Because when we look at the states that have fully legalized, it's actually blue and red. It's not just Democratic states. And when you talk about being fiscally responsible, when you talk about being able to be smart about things, I've had veterans that have come and testified before me when I sat on the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, and they basically admitted we will continue to break the law. We are going to get what we know helps us best. And so to make sure that we're not locking veterans up that are struggling because of the sacrifices they've made to this country, it only makes sense that we go as far as we can and we trust the science on this, which we've got decades and decades worth of science as it relates to this. Mm-hmm. And, this means that we can minimize, the overcrowding in our jails. This means that we can have only those bad guys that we need locked up, those people that are committing violent crimes and things like that. In addition to that, one of the things that I used to argue being a border state is that we could decrease the black market on marijuana, right? And so, as we talk about the border all the time right now, everybody only talks about fentanyl. But let me be honest about this and tell you that fentanyl is not the only drug that comes across the border. Drugs come across the border in all forms, and one of them is still, again, cannabis. And so what happens if market, in addition to the fact that we keep people safer, because now it's regulated, now we know that it's clean, we know who's growing it, we can hold people accountable if for some reason something happens. And so it's just smart. It's another way to bring in tax dollars. It's another way that we can go ahead and actually support our public schools or do whatever it is that we want to do with the money without increasing property taxes on people.
Right. And creating generational wealth with a new industry. Yep. One of the things, people are always so afraid of legalization, but one of the things that I noticed when we went legal here in California, I was still working for a dispensary back then was that it wasn't a free-for-all where everybody was like, let's get high. More people were coming in curious about using it for things like stress and help with sleep. And they're like, I felt funny about having to go to a doctor and get a recommendation during the medicinal days. So I'm glad that I can come in and ask questions now. And I think one of the things that we do to help create a safer environment is giving them information to be able to go and talk to their physicians about. And cannabis is very bipartisan. I had Michael Steele's been on the show a couple of times, and he's always like, if you knew the amount of people in my party that actually enjoy cannabis, if they would actually come out and talk about it, we'd be having a whole different conversation. And I feel like we could be working across the aisle to make this happen, to really help people.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's just a matter of the will. I mean, like I said, I was able to work with Freedom Caucus people. And I think also as we talk about fentanyl, and if people understand that it's mostly people that are addicted to opioids, we can talk about the destruction that opioids have absolutely caused us in this country. And what happens is people are seeking out some sort of opioid, and instead they sometimes end up with fentanyl. A lot of people aren't saying, hey, I want the fentanyl. They're actually trying to get opioids to treat that addiction. And that addiction is usually tied to some injury or something like that. But the data lines up that shows us that for a lot of things that people are using opioids for, they could actually use marijuana for.
Yep.
And it's actually safer. But if Big Pharma isn't in the middle of it, then it gets a little murky, right? And so, it's just one of those things. But I do want to be clear that we have a real opportunity to actually save lives by just being smart on this. This is just smart legislation. That's all it is. And we know that those states that have taken advantage, they are doing really well. And it's a huge source of relief to those citizens as relates to what they're required to do from a state taxing side of things.
Right. And then going back into your experience as a public defender and with policy, looking at restorative justice and social equity, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I do want to point out that the president has been pretty decent on this. There's only so much that a president can do by him or herself. But we know what's happened is that this president has recognized the wrongs that have taken place. We still have people that are being incarcerated for marijuana while other people are getting rich from marijuana, right? And so he absolutely has been making sure that people are getting pushed out of prison right now that have been incarcerated for marijuana. But there's greater work to be done that needs to come in from a legislative standpoint. One of the things that was frustrating when I was actually looking at this from a business standpoint years ago was I found out about the fact that those that had been involved in criminal justice, they were disallowed from participating in the legal gold rush. And so if you have been incarcerated for marijuana, then you weren't allowed to participate now that it's legal. And it was just interesting to recognize that the federal government was kind of still regulating this, even though they refused to fully legalize this. I mean, it's basically surviving right now with kind of a memorandum of understanding. And so, you walk into the wrong administration, and that may have a devastating consequence on states that have been participating and have legalized, for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the biggest conversations that we would have when making policy recommendations, especially when we started having the conversations about social equity in San Francisco, and the fact that how can we, in good conscience, go out and do our work working in the industry when there are still people that are stuck in jail, or people whose, family wealth is basically tied up in court cases because they're trying to get their loved one out of jail.
Yeah. It's a real thing.
When we're looking at legalization, people often ask me, Sarah, when do you think it'll be legalized at a federal level? And maybe I'm being a little negative, but I don't think it's going to be any time in the near future. I would be surprised if it's in the next 5 to 10 years.
Depends on the direction that we decide to go. I could see it happening within the next 5 to 10 years, but it just kind of depends. I mean, everything does start from the top,
Right.
As far as kind of like the mood and the attitude towards these things. So it's possible, but people have to believe and they've got to raise their voices and they've got to make sure they vote for the team that's going to make sure that it happens.
What are your thoughts on the Farm Bill? And I know it sounds like it might be pushed back a little bit this year. I mean, is that an understatement?
I have no thoughts. We know that this is the most unproductive Congress in modern day history. The Farm Bill was supposed to be completed last year, along with us getting a budget pass. We still haven't gotten a budget pass. We're 6 months behind on doing that, or we will be 6 months behind by the time our next deadline comes up for the most recent continuing resolution. In the Farm Bill, we did a year extension. So we've got until next, I think we did that around October or November. So it's extended until then. We'll see if we get something done. I mean, it's more time than we have to actually work on the budget. I think a lot of it may depend on what happens in November, though. And so if it seems as if there's a tide that's shifting and that the power in the House ends up shifting, then I think that they may push to try to get something through before that shift takes place. Otherwise, if they believe that they're going to stay in power, then I don't think that they'll necessarily rush. So we'll see. But I don't anticipate that we're going to be marking up in March. I think that that's the latest rumor that's out. I'll believe it when I see it.
That's wise. Very wise. I wanted to talk a little bit about a bill that you co-sponsored. It was HR 1003. And that was the requiring the Department of Veteran Affairs to study the effects of cannabis on vets enrolled in the VA and diagnosed with PTSD or chronic pain. Because I've worked with, I for many years, I ran a compassion program where we were able to give donated cannabis to our critically and chronically ill patients. And a lot of them were veterans. And they were still doing it anyway, but there was a lot of constant worry about losing their benefits with the VA.
Yeah, no. When you're trying to make sure that you can bring people to the party, sometimes you just got to give them receipts and make it more difficult for them to say no. And so this is just one of those things that we do a lot of times in legislation, is if it's something that on the face of it, they don't feel as if they can sell it to their constituents, then we try to make sure that we actually make it to where you can't not sell it to your constituents. I think that I have an idea of what the data will reveal. And so for me, absolutely study away and give us documentation so that then we can move the needle and get to the next phase, which is actually legalizing for this purpose and taking care of our veterans.
Yeah, there's so many veterans that I worked with that were able to either lower or minimize their usage of opiates using cannabis, and especially because there are a lot of side effects when you're going through withdrawal, and also being able to forego the use of benzodiazepines, which is huge for, this population that is actively dealing with PTSD. And it's just so wonderful that you're having these conversations and that, the VA is being held more accountable around this, because it's a huge issue. And a lot of our advocates are veterans, and it's, and activists, and they're doing a lot to try to change the way things are going. But when we are looking at legalization, I feel like a lot of times, especially in the industry, we're not thinking so much about the patients on whose backs we get to do our work today. But we start to get more into the general public and formula retail and forgetting about the patients and the medical programs, which I think is a really important knot.
Yep, it does.
When we're looking at safe banking, now I hear that it's called safer banking, and a colleague of mine was joking that it might get passed when it's safest banking. Uh, we're looking at a lot. It's a public safety issue that we aren't allowed to have banking, and that credit cards aren't allowed to be taken at dispensaries because, one, people know that there's a great deal of cash on hand at dispensaries and also other distribution areas. Secondly, because consumers can't go in with credit cards and pay, it's a public safety issue because somebody who's watching that front door also knows that people that are going into these stores probably have a good deal of money on them because cannabis is not inexpensive. When we're looking at safe banking from a federal standpoint, how important do you think your colleagues do you think that they understand the importance of creating this, and it's not necessarily as much around the industry really keeping the public safe?
I don't know that they do. That's not a conversation that I've engaged with anyone with on the federal level. I guess more so because we've not really had legislation that's been moving, but I specifically understand it. I know that we had a shortage on armored trucks because of this, because people were basically ordering armored trucks and they were keeping their cash in there. And then I know that we have the data now because we've got dispensaries throughout the country that have been victims of obviously robberies and things like that. And, you know, most states, I think that they try to counter the argument by saying, well, you know, in order for you to get a license, we require you to have this kind of safe and that kind of stuff, because it's not just the cash, it's actually the cannabis itself. You know, both of them, but it's kind of like a double whammy. Unlike when you walk into a jewelry store, it's just the jewelry. You're not necessarily expecting to find, you know, a ton of cash, and you get kind of both. And so I know that there are some states that have kind of done some creative things to kind of set up ways to kind of move money as it relates to marijuana and not necessarily have to deal with the federal banking systems. But it's a real issue that we need to talk about, especially for those that are constantly saying that they care about crime. But it's not a conversation because they're not really talking very much about marijuana at all.
Yeah, I hope we're able to have more conversations, but I understand that the stigma is strong. But I'm also just incredibly grateful for people like yourself who are pushing the conversation and really, you know, making sure that we're being thoughtful about what's being proposed at a federal level. And totally not related to cannabis, but what do you think about what's going on with the border and the $14 billion that the Republicans wanted, but now they're not supporting it as much? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's just another example of Republican hypocrisy, but I don't think that they ever wanted any money for the border. I think it was easier to kind of jump up and down and say, hey, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem, and beat their chest and go take photos and then say that there's an invasion and scare everyone and blame it on the person that's sitting in the White House when they know good and well that it actually takes legislation that has to come from Congress. And so then once, you know, the Senate says, okay, we're actually ready to produce legislation, they say, well, wait a minute. We don't really want to do that because what else are we going to run on if we, you know, don't have this to run on? I mean, if we say we pass legislation and we're going to try to fix something. So, you know, that's kind of where that lies. It's a game, and I think the American people are being played, but I think who ultimately will be played will be the Republicans, because even a blind man can see that this is nothing but a game for them. And Democrats are working every single day, really trying to do our best to make sure that we can support the American people and make sure that they feel safe at home, that they have the resources that they need, and that they fully understand that immigration in this country is, number one, a founding principle of who we are. We're a country of immigrants. Number two, with us having a decline in the growth of our own citizenry, then what we have to do is we absolutely, from an economic standpoint, we rely on immigrants. So when you're trying to figure out how can I lower the cost of food, you've got to have people that are going to work the farms. And so we have migrant farm workers that come in. And so immigrants contribute a great deal to this country economically, and they are not seeking to be a drain on our economy, but they're actually seeking to improve it and contribute to it. And so I think once we start to change the narrative around that and better educate people on what's going on, as well as make sure that people understand the importance of stabilizing those communities that they're coming from, and that making the investments in those countries and making people feel safe and not feel as if they need to flee their countries and leave their homes and leave their families, then at number one is less money for us. But number two, democracies are the way to go when we can kind of share the love and help out in other places.
Yeah, absolutely. As a child of an immigrant, I'm very grateful to be here instead of hanging out in Iran. And when I worked for Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, I saw the impact of people who were in dangerous situations that were allowed to have asylum in our country and grow their families and thrive and be happy, healthy people. And I just feel like we have so much more conversations to have about all the amazing different people that we have in this country that make it great, and how we can grow different industries and create different opportunities so that we finally have the real conversation about we're only as strong as our most vulnerable person that resides in our country.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Congresswoman. One final question for you. When you look to the future, what are some of the things that you're excited and hopeful about?
When I look to the future, I'm hopeful, probably most because of the next generation. Gen Z kind of gives me all the juice that I need to keep going. They are empathetic, they are thoughtful, they are compassionate, and they're fighters. And so if that's, what the future looks like, then I think the future is bright. I think that their life experiences are going to push them to do a lot more and a lot better than so many of my contemporaries are doing on behalf of them and the rest of the country and the world. So Gen Z makes me hopeful.
Yeah, I totally feel that myself. Thank you so much. And thank you for being you. Thank you for representing us. Thank you for telling the truth. And I'm really, really thrilled and excited to see all to make this country a better place. So thank you. And for those who want to see what you're doing and follow you, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, so it's Rep Jasmine on all social media platforms. Just REPJASMINE. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Take care. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher, tune in. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.